Carly Sullivan.
And I'm Michaela Mann.
And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about euthanasia. Socrates said, "The difficulty, my friends, is not in avoiding death, but in avoiding unrighteousness, for that runs faster than death." Any discussion centered around death or dying is incomplete without the mention of ethical issues. These issues can be found all over news headlines today. Organ donation, end-of-life care, capital punishment, and abortion are just a few. The ethical debate that will nearly involve everyone at some point in time in their life is euthanasia, whether it be with a loved one or just society about voting about it and things like that. So you might be asking what our thesis is. After reviewing the principles of beneficence, autonomy, and truth-telling, it can be concluded that euthanasia should be legal in our society today. What is euthanasia? Euthanasia literally translates into a good or happy death. As Americans, we often translate it into mercy killing because it sounds more socially acceptable. There are two types of patients when regarding euthanasia, and the first is a persistent vegetative state, and that is someone who relies on extra artificial life support, which could be a feeding tube or a breathing tube. The second is a patient with a terminal illness or injury, and they're already experiencing or likely to experience discomfort, psychological suffering, and loss of dignity. And that can be observed in the movie The Bucket List with the two men who have terminal cancer. In addition to that, there are two different types of euthanasia. One, active euthanasia, which is an act of commission, and it's usually done by the means of lethal injection. And the second is passive euthanasia, which is an act of omission, and it's taking no action to maintain life, so withholding food, water, drugs, and things like that. One important binding document in patient-physician care is the Hippocratic Oath, and it was written by Hippocrates in ancient Greece, and its principles are held sacred by doctors to this day. A revised version was written by Louis Lasagna, a professor of medicine at Tufts University in 1964, and that's the version used by a majority of medical schools around the country. Many physicians have come to feel that the Hippocratic Oath is inadequate to address advancements in medical technology, and physicians are caught in a catch-22 type of dilemma. They can use aggressive measures to prolong life at the expense of someone's physical comfort and loss of personal autonomy, or they can progress the dying process in order to avoid discomfort and maintain dignity at the expense of the physician's obligation to do no harm. So I'm going to read a little piece of the old Hippocratic Oath, and so you can see where it originated from. And this book is Introducing Death and Dying by Dr. Thomas Carr, and he still is a professor here at the university. Part of the old Hippocratic Oath says, "I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody who asks for it, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect. Similarly, I will not give to a woman an abortive remedy. In purity and holiness, I will guard my life and my art. I would not use the knife, not even on sufferers from stone, but will withdraw in favor of such men as are engaged in this work." So I think that just a little bit of the old Hippocratic Oath goes to show what those people in ancient Greece thought about life and their morals that they had, and you can see that those have radically changed. So one case that we'd like to present to you, but not focus on, is Brittany Menard. She is 29 years old and was recently diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. And our presentation isn't actually centered around this case, but it came up about this past Tuesday all over Facebook and the news. I'm sure some of you have seen it, so we'd like to shed a little bit of light on it. She was originally from California, but decided to move to Oregon to enforce the Death with Dignity Act. In this book, it also says some of the requirements of the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, and they include: the request must be voluntary, no doctor is forced to comply, the patient must be an adult who is terminally ill and mentally competent, the request must be an enduring one, a 15-day waiting period is required, an examination by a mental health professional may be required, the request must be made orally and in writing and witnessed. All alternatives will be explained to the patient. The patient receives a prescription for a lethal dose of medication which must be self-administered, and the patient must be allowed to change his or her mind at any time. And similar bills have been passed and introduced in 29 state legislators, but there's only 5 states that currently allow this death with dignity to be enforced: Oregon, Washington, Montana, Vermont, and New Mexico. And I just want to play a little clip about Brittany and some of her views, and it talks a little bit about the religious aspect just for a few brief seconds. But
I hope to enjoy however many days I have left on this beautiful earth and spend as much of it outside as I can, surrounded by those I love.
Brittany Maynard may have been diagnosed with glioblastoma, the deadliest, most aggressive form of brain cancer, but she is not letting her cancer choose when she dies.
I can't even tell you the amount of relief that it provides me to know that I don't have to die the way that it's been described to me that my brain tumor would take me on its own.
November 1st, 2 days after her husband's birthday, Brittany will take a pill.
I will die upstairs in my bedroom that I share with my husband, with my mother and my husband by my side, and pass peacefully with some music that I like in the background.
An option she has living in one of 5 states with the Death with Dignity law. This is a video Brittany made after teaming up with Compassion and Choices, an organization now trying to advocate for assisted death in Colorado.
You're coming to terms with the end of your life, and it's a process we shouldn't hasten.
Some civil and religious organizations like the Archdiocese of Denver are opposed.
I think the #1 message we would want to get out to anyone who is thinking of assisted suicide is that every single person has worth. And it doesn't matter the stage of life you're in, it doesn't matter if you're suffering or not suffering.
Brittany is spending her final weeks doing what she loves, traveling with her family.
Seize the day. What's important to you? What do you care about? What matters? Pursue that. Forget the rest.
so this is just one example in recent news how much euthanasia is becoming a part of our society, not just in those 5 states, but Compassion and Choices that's being broadcasted all over the U.S. So the case we're actually going to focus on is from this book again, and it's from Dr. Timothy Quill, and he has a 45-year-old patient who's suffering from leukemia. Her name is Diane, and there was a 25% chance of survival if she agreed to submit to a painful routine of chemo, radiation, and bone marrow transplant. Married and having a college-age son, they all decided that it was probably best for her to deny the treatment. And she decided that she wanted Dr. Quill to help her end her life when the time was right. She wanted to be able to die with dignity before the cancer took her own life functions away from her. Quill agreed to describe the medication that we saw in the last video, along with the instructions on how to take it in order to get the desired effect. But the laws of New York consider this to be an act of civil disobedience because physician-assisted suicide is illegal in New York. And Quill used several ethical principles, which Michaela will talk about here in a second, to advocate for legal active euthanasia. Like I said, many states are getting ready to take this particular issue to the polls, so these are some things that you might want to know about before you get voting, because that's your right too.
So in this case, some ethical theories that I'll talk about. Starting with the first one is beneficence. And beneficence means to help others by doing the good deeds and removing the harms. In class, we discussed how beneficence relates to non-maleficence, which is not interfering or harming of someone else. When it comes to regarding healthcare, beneficence is the stronger principle. Quill and most supporters of physician-assisted suicide argue that if the patient is suffering and able to make a sound decision about ending their life, that it is considered compassionate and beneficent to kill the patient or assist them in self-inflicted death. One might argue that denying a patient this right is to be inflicting more harm on them. It would be cruel and immoral not to fulfill the patient's request. The physician is not intending to kill, but simply relieving the suffering. Autonomy. An individual has the freedom to determine their own actions and behavior. It was discussed in class how autonomy leads to patient control. The patient has the ability to decide for themselves how medical treatment fits in their own values. The act of euthanasia and assisted suicide is classified as beneficent since it respects the principle of autonomy. A physician who refuses to comply with the autonomous requests of the patient is considered to violate respect for persons. To violate the dignity and the autonomy of the suffering patient is to abandon that human being in their greatest time of need. Truth. When a person relies on something or something. When a person relies on someone or something. Trust was discussed in class by relating it to confidentiality. A patient must trust that a physician is only sharing their health information with the appropriate people. The principle of trust plays an incasable role in physician-patient relationships. The patient must be able to fully trust that the physician will do what is best for them. The best course of action is determined based on the diagnosis, prognosis, and the treatment options that are available to the patient. In our conclusion, we summed it up as that we have attempted to show euthanasia, if accepted in the biomedical ethics world, would have a new take on three main dimensions of ethics, which is beneficence, protection of one's autonomy, and the trust through those three principles. One might ask if there is a difference in the ethical standpoint between active and passive euthanasia. Ultimately, the intention of both is the same, and that is to end the life of the patient. As described before, in active euthanasia, the physician is the immediate cause. In passive euthanasia, commonly known a physician-assisted suicide, known as physician-assisted suicide, the physician is cooperating cause. He or she provides the legal medication and advises with the proper dose that should be in order, and that is the most effective. The physician's cooperation and knowledge is necessary for the death to be carried out. The responsibility in both passive and active euthanasia is shared equally between the patient and the physician. Therefore, if the patient makes an educated decision and the physician complies with it, it is ultimately the patient's choice to what they believe is best for them and the loved ones around them.
Do you guys know, like, when you were researching this stuff, has there ever been any, like, proposed legislation in Ohio about euthanasia?
I didn't look that deep into it, but I do not believe so. A lot of the states were more like towards the west, southwest. So.
The drug they gave to, like, basically like assisting the suicide, do you know what it does to the body and like, what exactly it is, or are you not really sure?
No. I mean, I talked a little bit about it in this class, but we didn't go into great detail.
For your like case that you looked at with a lady that had leukemia, since it was like technically illegal in New York, how did she have access to the drug like when she was prescribed?
The second case with Diane.
Yeah.
Quill said that he would administer the drug to, like, write the prescription and things like that, but it never came to be because they considered it civil disobedience before it got that far. She didn't have access to the drug. Brittany, in the first case in the video, she did. She moved from California to Oregon in order to enforce that act.
So in that case, she just died of her disease?
Yeah, months later, she passed away. And throughout this book, it talks about how Quill had such a hard time as a physician, just watching her do that when he knew that it was her right as well as his right if they came to that agreement to do something about it. It's interesting to see their relationship play out because she said at the end that she would see him on the sides of the mountain, her family and everybody that was close to her, which he ended up being pretty close to that family, and so he planned on taking a trip to go see her, so it was interesting.
discussed a lot about the Hippocratic Oath. Did it have anything that stated like certain types of inadequacies that they were wanting to change today that haven't been changed recently?
Like I said, the majority of my resources came out of here, and there's a whole new Hippocratic Oath that's written, but mostly in this context, euthanasia is a big part of what some physicians wish they could change. Some physicians have their morals and values and beliefs that it's wrong, it's completely wrong, but some believe that it should be enforced, and that's like a big problem because the rewritten version never really addressed whether it was right or wrong. It's not black and white, it's a lot of gray in it. Yeah.
Kind of just on top of this question of like Ohio possibly legalizing it, are there other states that are like in the process of moving towards legalization, or is it more concrete, the ones that are against it are like against it and not looking to move towards legalization?
We didn't really like get that far into detail as far as like the separate states go and who's really enforcing it, but there's definitely like, you know, those states such as Oregon where it's already allowed, and then there's those other states such as Ohio where it's in the process of, is this right or is this wrong?
Two really big states that are pushing for it right now are New York, where Diane was from, and California, originally where Brittany was from. Brittany released that video, and it's being used, not that video, there's a longer video, it's about 9 minutes long. It's being released to, I think, 4 states, with the big ones in California and New York, to advocate for the legalization of euthanasia.
Is it wrong if the person really wants it? Like, my dad had a number of reasons that he thought he had lived long enough. And one of them was the economics, that he said that for him to stay alive when there was medical assistance required, he kept the money that was used for that away from a Head Start program that would include so many kids. And it was hard to argue against that because Dad was always so conservative and giving during his life. And then another thing he said is, if I get where I don't know that I'm alive and don't want to be alive, why should I be alive for another year or two? Again, thinking of the economics of it. And all the stuff that I've heard or read about euthanasia, very seldom does it get into economics, which I thought was a kind of a different slant that my dad had on it.
I think economics is a big part in any part of the biomedical ethics, not just in euthanasia, but even vaccines, as they talked about, and life-saving measures, like with this new Ebola drug that they gave to the 2 missionaries. It's not available for anybody else, and part of that is because people aren't wealthy enough to pursue those options. If they only have to make 10 new vaccines for or new remedies for the Ebola, there's not enough money coming in to produce out, if that makes sense. I think economics is just, if you're not, I think it's been painted a picture to society, if you're not wealthy enough, you're not able to get the care that wealthier individuals are able to have.
Did you guys look into like the physician administering the drug himself?
Yeah, we didn't really look at that for our specific presentation, but that would be an act of euthanasia, and a lot of times that's considered with capital punishment and death row and things like that.
Okay, thank you.